The struggling black widow found the 16-year-old girl tied to her fence at dawn, rope burns marking pale wrists like accusation. Evangeline Crosswater dropped her laundry basket. The morning light caught the girl's yellow hair, tangled with desert dust and tears. A crumpled note was pinned to her faded dress like a scarlet letter. Evie's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. The words blurred together through her exhaustion. Silas Dawn. Dangerous men. More money than I'll ever have. Take care of my Maggie. The girl's eyes were the color of storm clouds. They held secrets that made Evie's chest tighten. In the distance, dust plumes rose against the orange sky, riders approaching fast. Evie looked at her modest cabin. 3 years of careful living since Jacob's death. 3 years of mending clothes and taking in wash. 3 years of keeping her head down and her heart closed. The girl whispered something through cracked lips. Water. The word hung in the air between them like a prayer. Cornelius Blake's weathered boots appeared in Evie's peripheral vision. The old man's presence was solid as mountain stone. His general store had survived 2 decades in Copper Ridge by knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. He read the note over her shoulder. His sharp intake of breath told her everything. This will bring trouble. Evie's neighbors were already stirring. Curtains twitched in windows. Voices carried on the wind. News traveled faster than wildfire in small towns. The girl's breathing was shallow. 2 days without food, maybe more. Her father had tied her up in the darkness and disappeared like smoke. Left her to die or worse. Evie's knife cut through the rope with surgical precision. The girl's wrists were raw beneath the bonds. She collapsed against the fence post, too weak to stand. Can you walk? The girl nodded. Tried to rise. Failed. Evie's arms were stronger than they looked. Years of washing and mending had built muscle beneath worn sleeves. She lifted the girl like she weighed nothing, like she was made of desert air and broken dreams. Cornelius followed them inside. His face was grave as winter. Sheriff's coming. Saw him mounting up at the jail. Evie set the girl on her only chair. Poured water from the pitcher. Watched pale lips drink like salvation. What's your name? Magnolia. The voice was barely a whisper. Folks call me Maggie. Through the window, more dust clouds gathered. Men on horseback asking questions, searching for something, someone. Evie's heart hammered against her ribs. Taking in this white girl would destroy everything. Her reputation, her business, her carefully constructed life. But leaving Maggie meant certain death. The girl's eyes found hers, storm clouds clearing to reveal sky beneath. Something passed, between them. Recognition, understanding, the kind of knowing that comes from being abandoned by the world. Hoofbeats drummed closer. Sheriff Hayes dismounted outside. His knock was polite but firm. Evie opened the door. Hayes was a fair man, but fairness had limits in Nevada territory. Morning, Evie. Heard you had some excitement. Behind him, 3 more riders approached. The lead man sat his horse like a predator. His eyes were the color of old iron. Cold. Calculating. Name's Jack Malone. Looking for a man named Silas Dawn. And his yellow-haired daughter. Maggie's sharp intake of breath cut through the morning air. Evie stepped forward, blocking the doorway with her body. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Malone's smile was winter sharp. Funny thing about missing people, they always turn up eventually. He wheeled his horse around. Dust swirled in his wake like a promise of violence. Sheriff Hayes lingered. His expression was troubled. Be careful, Evie. These men aren't from around here. They play by different rules. When they were gone, Evie closed the door, turned to find Maggie watching her with new eyes. Why did you help me? The question hung in the air like smoke. Evie had no answer that made sense. Sometimes the heart chose before the mind could interfere. Outside, the town was waking up. Voices carried on the wind. Her name mixed with speculation and judgment. By noon, everyone would know. By evening, the consequences would begin. Maggie stood on unsteady legs, crossed to the window, stared out at the fence where she'd spent the night believing she would die. "He's not coming back." The words were spoken with certainty that came from too much experience with disappointment. Evie looked at this girl who'd been thrown into her life like a stone into still water. Ripples were already spreading. There was no going back to the quiet existence she'd built from grief and determination. "Then we'll figure out what comes next." Maggie turned from the window. Something had shifted in her expression. The storm clouds were clearing. Together? The word carried weight that neither of them fully understood yet. But sometimes promises were made before wisdom could intervene. Together. By noon, the town had sharpened its knives. Mrs. Henderson arrived first. Her pale hands clutched the dress she'd commissioned. The fabric was half finished, pins still marking the hemline. "I'll be taking my business elsewhere." She set 2 coins on Evie's table. Payment for work already completed. Nothing more. Maggie watched from the corner. Her storm cloud eyes tracked each movement, each slight, each door that closed before it fully opened. Mrs. Patterson came next, then Mrs. Whitmore. The mayor's wife spoke in clipped sentences about propriety and expectations, about what decent folks could and could not abide. Each cancellation hit Evie's chest like stones thrown at still water, ripples of consequence spreading wider with every impact. By evening, her order book was empty. Maggie sat at the kitchen table. Her fingers traced patterns in the wood grain. The silence between them grew heavy as storm clouds. "This is because of me." Evie's hands stilled on the mending in her lap, a torn shirt that belonged to no one now, work that would bring no payment. "This is because of fear." Outside, voices carried on the desert wind. The town was gathering. Mayor Whitmore's voice rose above the others. Words like responsibility and consequences mixed with the dust. Cornelius Blake appeared at the back door. His weathered face was grim as winter. "Emergency meeting at the town hall. They want the girl gone by morning." Maggie's chair scraped against the floor. She stood and walked to the window, stared out at the fence where rope burns still marked the wood. "I knew he was planning it." The words fell into the room like stones into deep water. Evie looked up from her mending. "Planning what?" "To leave me." Maggie's voice carried no surprise, only the weight of old disappointments. "I'd been putting food outside for 3 days. Knew he was watching the house, learning your habits." The truth hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. "He chose you careful. Asked questions about the widow woman who mended clothes. Said you had kind eyes." Evie's needle stilled in her fingers. The calculation behind Silas Dawn's desperation revealed itself slowly, like bones emerging from thawing ground. "How long have you known?" "That he'd run?" Maggie turned from the window. Her young face carried too much knowing. "Since the gambling got bad. Since the men started coming around asking for money we didn't have." Through the walls, they could hear the town meeting growing louder. Voices, raised in judgment and fear. Decisions being made about lives they didn't understand. Maggie moved to Evie's sewing basket, lifted a piece of half-finished embroidery. Her fingers traced the delicate stitches with surprising knowledge. "My mama taught me before she died, said a woman needed skills to survive." She picked up Evie's needle. Thread gleamed silver in the lamplight. Her stitches were small and precise. Professional. "You sew like someone who's done it for money." Maggie's hand stilled. The needle hung suspended between them like a confession waiting to be born. "Papa's gambling debts got too big for honest work. Had me mending clothes for the saloon girls, fixing dresses torn in fights, making alterations for women who couldn't afford better." The admission settled into the room like dust after wind. Evie watched this girl who was revealing herself in careful layers, each truth more complex than the last. "What else did you do for him?" Maggie set down the needle, walked to the small bag she'd carried from the fence. Inside, hidden beneath worn clothes, was a leather portfolio. He needed papers, documents that looked official, bank drafts, land deeds, letters of credit. She opened the portfolio. Inside were examples of her work. Each document was crafted with meticulous care. The handwriting was elegant, practiced, dangerous. I can copy any signature, any official seal. Made Papa $300 last month forging mining claims. Evie's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just an abandoned child. This was a girl who'd been shaped into a weapon by desperation and circumstance. How much does he owe? $3,000, maybe more. Maggie's voice was steady as stone. To men who collect debts with blood when paper money runs dry. Outside, the town meeting was breaking up. Footsteps approached on the boardwalk. Heavy boots that belonged to men carrying authority and ultimatums. Sheriff Hayes knocked once, entered without waiting for permission. Towns decided, Evie. Girl goes to the territorial authorities in the morning, for her own protection. Behind him stood Mayor Whitmore. His soft face was set in lines of civic duty and barely concealed fear. Nothing personal, you understand. But we can't have this kind of trouble in Copper Ridge. Maggie moved to stand beside Evie, her young shoulders squared against the judgment flowing from the doorway. And if I refuse to, go? Hayes adjusted his hat. The gesture spoke of uncomfortable duty and laws that bent around fear. Then we'll have to make that decision for you. When they were gone, Evie and Maggie sat in silence. The lamplight flickered against walls that suddenly felt smaller, more fragile. They're right about one thing. Maggie's voice was quiet as prayer. The men hunting Papa won't stop. Won't care who gets hurt. She moved to the window again, stared out at the desert that stretched beyond the town's borders, endless and unforgiving as human nature. Maybe I should go. Where? Evie's question cut through the night air. Territorial. Authorities will put you in an orphanage, or worse. Better than getting you killed. The words hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Evie looked at this girl who'd been taught that her worth was measured in sacrifice and survival. There's another choice. Maggie turned from the window. Hope flickered in her storm cloud eyes. We stay. We fight. We figure out how to end this, without running. Outside, the desert wind carried whispers of men on horseback, of debts that demanded payment in more than money, of consequences that followed the innocent and guilty alike. But inside, two women sat in lamplight and chose courage over safety. Chose each other over the easier path of separation and surrender. The decision settled into their bones like winter cold, permanent and transforming. Iron Jack's men moved through Copper Ridge like smoke through dry grass. They knocked on doors with gloved fists, asked questions with voices that promised consequences for wrong answers, searched root cellars and back rooms with methodical patience. Evie watched from her window as they worked their way down Main Street, house by house, family by family, getting closer. Maggie sat at the kitchen table with Silas's letters spread before her. Her fingers traced the desperate handwriting. Decoded the cryptic references to debts and deadlines. He mentions the Broken Wheel Saloon, says he's got insurance there. Evie looked over her shoulder. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago, before the abandonment, before everything unraveled. What kind of insurance? Documents, papers that prove other people's secrets. Maggie's voice was steady as winter stone. Papa always said information was worth more than gold. Outside, Iron Jack emerged from the Peterson house. His iron-gray coat flapped in the desert wind. His eyes swept the street with predator patience. They had maybe an hour before he reached their door. Evie's savings jar sat on the mantelpiece. 3 years of careful living reduced to $47.16. Not enough to run. Barely enough to survive another month. We need to understand what we're fighting. Maggie nodded. Gathered the letters into careful stacks. Her organizational skills spoke of practice, of a mind trained to find patterns in chaos. Papa owed money to 5 different men, but they all report to Iron Jack. He's the collector for a whole network. She pulled out a sketch. rough lines depicting the territory from memory, towns connected by dotted lines, names written in careful script. They're not just after Papa's debt. They're taking over, buying up land, forcing out people who won't sell. The scope of it settled into the room like smoke from a distant fire. This wasn't about one man's gambling problem. This was about power, control, the systematic theft of everything decent folks had built. Through the walls, they heard boots on the boardwalk, heavy steps that belonged to men carrying authority they'd never earned. Iron Jack knocked once, entered without invitation. His pale eyes swept the room. Catalogued details, noted the mending basket, the empty order book, the way Maggie's hands stilled on the scattered papers. "Afternoon, ladies." Evie stepped between him and the table. Her body blocked his view of Silas's letters. "We're closed, for business." "That's a shame. Heard you did fine work." His smile was winter sharp. Course, a woman needs customers to make a living. Behind him, two men filled the doorway. Their faces were carved from desert stone. Their hands rested near, weapons with casual familiarity. Funny thing about Silas Dawn. Man leaves debts scattered across 3 territories, but he's careful about his daughter. Real careful. Iron Jack moved closer. His boots left prints in the dust that had settled since the last customers fled. "See? A man like Silas knows his little girl is valuable, knows she's got skills that make her worth keeping alive." Maggie's breathing stayed steady, but her knuckles whitened where they gripped the table edge. "Don't know what you're talking about." "Course you don't." Iron Jack's laugh was dry as desert wind. "Just like you don't know why a smart man would leave his most precious possession with a stranger." He picked up one of Evie's needles, tested the point against his finger, drew a single drop of blood that gleamed like a promise. Unless that stranger wasn't really a stranger at all. The accusation hung in the air between them. Evie felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the careful story of accidental discovery crumbling under scrutiny. "We've got 48 hours to find Silas Dawn. After that, we start collecting payment in other ways." When they were gone, Evie and Maggie sat in silence. The needle lay on the table where Iron Jack had dropped it. A single spot of blood marked the wood. "He knows something." Maggie nodded. Her storm cloud eyes were distant, calculating. "Papa was too smart to choose random. He watched you for weeks, maybe months." She moved to the window, stared out at the fence where rope burns still scarred the wood. "There's something else in his letters. Something I didn't tell you." The admission settled between them like stones thrown into still water. "He mentions meetings, secret ones. Says he's got evidence that could bring down the whole network." Evie looked up from the blood-stained needle. "What kind of evidence?" "Names, dates, records of bribes and threats." Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. "He was blackmailing them. That's why they want him alive." The truth rearranged everything they thought they understood. Silas wasn't just a desperate gambler. He was a man who'd tried to turn predator against predator, and lost. Where would he hide something that valuable? Maggie closed her eyes. Her fingers traced patterns against the window glass. Memory made manifest in unconscious gesture, somewhere safe, somewhere they'd never think to look. She turned from the window. Her young face carried old knowledge. The mine, the old copper mine where Papa worked before the gambling took hold. He used to take me there when I was small. Said it was our secret place. Outside, the desert wind carried sounds of Iron Jack's men continuing their search, voices raised in frustration, doors slamming in empty houses. Time was running out like sand through broken glass. Evie looked at this girl who'd been thrust into her life like salvation disguised as catastrophe. 3 days ago, her biggest worry was making rent. Now she was planning to infiltrate an abandoned mine to recover evidence that could save or damn them both. If we do this, there's no going back. Maggie's smile was winter sharp. Old pain tempered into something harder than hope. Been no going back since the moment you cut those ropes. The decision settled into their bones like cold earth, permanent and transforming. They would go to the mine. They would find Silas's insurance. They would turn hunter against hunted. Or they would die trying. Outside, the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Shadows grew long and forgiving. Night would come soon. And with it, the chance to disappear into darkness that hid desperate women as well as desperate men. Evie gathered her few supplies. Maggie folded the letters with careful precision. 2 women preparing for war disguised as rescue. The desert waited, patient as death, unforgiving as human nature. But sometimes the hunted found ways to bite back. The copper mine crouched against the mountainside like a wound in the earth. Evie and Maggie approached through moonlight that turned the desert silver. Their footsteps whispered against stone and sage. The abandoned workings stretched before them like broken teeth. Maggie led the way with memory's confidence. Her small hands traced wooden support beams that remembered her childhood touch. The mine shaft descended into darkness that swallowed their lamplight. Papa used to bring me here after Mama died, said the earth kept secrets better than people. 20 feet down, the main tunnel branched into smaller passages. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The sound echoed against stone walls that had witnessed 1,000 desperate conversations. Maggie stopped at the third passage, pressed her palm against a support beam marked with initials. SD carved deep into weathered wood. Here, behind the beam, hidden in a natural crevice, sat a metal box, the kind used for storing mining documents. Silas had wrapped it in oilcloth against the mountain's moisture. Inside were papers that could topple kingdoms built on fear, lists of names, territorial officials who took bribes, judges who sold verdicts, sheriff's deputies who looked away from murder. The entire network mapped in Silas Dawn's careful handwriting. But underneath the documents lay something that made Evie's blood run cold. Forged land deeds. Dozens of them. Properties throughout the territory signed over to fictitious buyers. All in Maggie's precise script. I didn't know. Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. He told me they were practice. Just exercises to keep my skills sharp. Each deed represented a family displaced, a homestead stolen, a life destroyed by the stroke of her talented pen. The weight of unknowing complicity settled into the tunnel, like mining dust. Above them, footsteps echoed against stone. Voices carried down the shaft. Iron Jack's men had found their trail. Evie gathered the papers with desperate efficiency. The evidence would damn them all. But it might also save them. There's another way out, through the old ventilation shaft. Maggie moved deeper into the tunnel. Her memory navigated passages that wound through the mountain's heart. Behind them, lamplight flickered as their pursuers descended. The ventilation shaft climbed toward stars. Handholds carved into living rock by miners who'd needed escape routes when the earth turned hostile. They emerged on the mountain's far side. The town spread below them like scattered jewels. Copper Ridge slept while predators prowled its streets, but they weren't alone on the mountainside. Silas Dawn sat on a boulder 50 yards away. His silhouette was unmistakable against the star-drunk sky. He'd been waiting for them to find his insurance, waiting for his daughter to lead someone trustworthy to his secrets. Hello, Maggie. His voice carried across the desert air, worn thin by weeks of hiding, shaped by desperation into something harder than hope. Maggie's breathing stopped. 3 weeks of abandonment crystallized into this moment. Father and daughter separated by distance that measured more than yards. You came back. Never left. Been watching from up here, making sure you were safe. Silas stood slowly. His clothes were desert-stained. His face was carved lean by hunger and fear. But his eyes held the same storm cloud gray as his daughter's. Saw Iron Jack's men searching the town. Knew they'd push you toward the mine eventually. Evie stepped between them. The papers crackled in her hands. Evidence of crimes that stretched across territories. Proof of corruption that reached into the highest offices. You used her. The accusation hung in the mountain air, sharp as winter wind. Used her skills, her talents, made her an accessory to theft and fraud. Silas's gaze dropped to the papers in Evie's hands. His shoulders sagged under the weight of choices that had seemed necessary at the time. Didn't have choice, they wanted too much, more than I could ever pay working honest. So you decided to steal it instead. Decided to take from folks who'd been taking from everyone else. His voice carried the brittle edge of failed justification. Thought I was evening the scales. Maggie moved closer to her father. The pull of blood was stronger than the logic of abandonment. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you explain what we were really doing? Because you're good, Maggie. Got your mama's heart. Didn't want to poison that with knowing. Below them, lights moved through the mine entrance. Iron Jack's men emerging empty-handed, frustrated, dangerous. They'll tear the town apart looking for those papers. Silas nodded. His weathered hands trembled with exhaustion and fear. Already started. Sheriff Hayes disappeared yesterday. Cornelius Blake's store got ransacked. They're herding innocent folks to get to me. The scope of the destruction settled around them like smoke from distant fires. This wasn't just about one man's debts anymore. It was about a community held hostage by corruption and greed. Got a plan, though. Way to end this clean. Silas pulled a crumpled poster from his coat. Wanted notice with his name and description. $500 reward for information leading to his capture. Going to turn myself in. Trade my life for the town's safety. Maggie's sharp intake of breath cut through the mountain air. They'll kill you. Maybe. But they'll stop hunting you. Stop hurting folks who don't deserve it. He reached for the papers in Evie's hands. His fingers brushed the evidence that could destroy the network or damn his daughter. Need those documents. Proof of what I've done. Make the trade official. Evie pulled the papers back. Her grip tightened against his reaching hands. There's another way. The words emerged from some deep place where desperation met determination, where impossible situations demanded impossible solutions. We use the evidence. Not to trade for your life. To destroy them completely. Silas's laugh was dry as desert wind. You don't understand what we're fighting. These men own judges. Buy sheriffs. Kill anyone who threatens their operation. Then we go higher. Federal marshals. Territorial governors. People they can't buy or intimidate. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Indifferent to human struggles. Constant as the desert that had witnessed 1,000 desperate schemes. But sometimes desperate schemes worked. Sometimes David's stone found its mark. Would need to get word out without them knowing. Contact people they can't reach. Maggie stepped forward. Her young face was set with determination that transcended her years. I know how to forge more than land deeds. Can write letters that look official. Documents that demand investigation. The plan began to take shape in the mountain darkness, dangerous as nitroglycerin, fragile as spider silk, but it was better than surrender, better than watching good people die for one man's mistakes. Father and daughter looked at each other across years of secrets and lies, across weeks of abandonment and desperate love. You sure about this? Maggie's smile was winter sharp. Old pain tempered into something harder than forgiveness. Been sure since the moment you tied me to that fence. The words carried weight that rearranged everything between them. Childhood ended. Adulthood chosen rather than granted. Below them, Iron Jack's men mounted their horses, rode back toward town with empty hands and growing frustration. Tomorrow would bring consequences, violence, the systematic destruction of everything decent folks had built. But tonight, 3 people sat on a mountainside and chose war over surrender. Chose each other over the easier path of separation and sacrifice. The desert wind carried their whispers toward stars that had witnessed every human folly, every desperate gamble against impossible odds. Dawn broke over Copper Ridge like spilled blood. Iron Jack rode down Main Street with Silas Dawn's broken body draped across his saddle. The man was alive, but barely. His face was swollen beyond recognition. His hands were bound with rope that had cut deep trenches in his wrists. The entire town gathered to witness the display. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts. Men removed, their hats in the presence of violence that exceeded their understanding. Iron Jack dismounted outside the sheriff's office. His pale eyes swept the crowd with predator satisfaction. Found this one trying to break into the Territorial Bank in Carson City. Seems he had some fool notion about stealing enough money to clear his debts. Silas lifted his head with tremendous effort. His storm cloud eyes found Maggie in the crowd. The look that passed between them carried messages that transcended words. He'd sacrificed himself to buy them time, given up his freedom so they could execute their desperate plan. Now I got what I came for. Iron Jack's voice carried across the morning air. But seems this man's got a daughter who's been hiding evidence of his crimes. He pulled Silas upright. The man's legs wouldn't support his weight. Blood dripped from split lips onto the dusty street. So here's what's going to happen. Little, yellow-haired girl has until sunset to bring me every document her daddy stole, every forgery she made, every piece of paper that mentions my business. The ultimatum settled over the town like smoke from a distant fire. If she doesn't, I start collecting payment in other ways, beginning with anyone who's helped hide her. His iron gaze found Evie in the crowd. The threat was clear as desert sky. When the crowd dispersed, Evie and Maggie returned to the cabin in silence. The weight of impossible choices pressed against their shoulders like mining timbers ready to collapse. Maggie sat at the kitchen table. Her talented fingers spread Silas's documents across the scarred wood, evidence of corruption that reached into the highest territorial offices. I have to give him the papers. Her voice was steady as winter stone, but her hands trembled against the documents that represented their only hope of justice. That's what he wants you to think. Evie moved to the window, watched Iron Jack's men position themselves throughout the town, guards at every exit, watchers on every corner. But we're not giving him the originals. The plan had crystallized during the long night on the mountainside. Dangerous as dynamite, delicate as spider silk spun in desert wind. Maggie looked up from the papers. Understanding flickered in her storm cloud eyes. Forgeries. The best you've ever made. Documents that look identical but contain subtle changes. Names altered by single letters. Dates shifted by days. Evidence that seems damning, but won't hold up under scrutiny. While Maggie worked her dangerous magic, Evie prepared the real documents for transport. The genuine evidence would travel by routes that avoided Iron Jack's watchers. Cornelius Blake arrived through the back door as the sun reached its zenith. His weathered face was grim as winter. Got word to the federal marshals in Carson City. Used the telegraph at the mining office before Iron Jack's men could stop me. He carried a small leather satchel. Inside were official territorial seals that his general store stocked for mining claims and land patents. These will make your forgeries look authentic. Maggie's fingers worked with supernatural precision. Each document was crafted to fool cursory inspection while containing subtle flaws that would reveal themselves under careful examination. How long before the marshals arrive? 2 days, maybe 3, if the weather turns. Outside, the sun continued its relentless journey toward the western mountains. Each passing hour brought them closer to Iron Jack's deadline. By late afternoon, Maggie had completed her masterwork. Dozens of forged documents that appeared identical to the originals, each one containing deliberate errors that would expose Iron Jack's network to federal investigation. When he presents these as evidence of his legitimacy, the marshals will see through every lie. Evie wrapped the real documents in oilcloth. Cornelius would carry them to the territorial capital by routes that avoided the main roads. Hidden cargo that represented justice delayed, but not denied. As sunset approached, the town held its breath. Iron Jack waited in the street with theatrical patience. Silas Dawn knelt beside him, hands still bound, face still swollen beyond easy recognition. Maggie walked toward them carrying the forged documents. Her young shoulders were squared against the weight of desperate gambles and impossible choices. Every paper Daddy stole, every document with your name on it. Iron Jack examined the forgeries with casual thoroughness. His pale eyes scanned names and dates and accusations. Found everything exactly as expected. Smart girl, just like your daddy said. He gestured to his men. Two of them lifted Silas to his feet. The man swayed but remained upright through sheer determination. Course, your daddy's still got debts to pay, still owes money that can't be forgiven just because his daughter's cooperative. The trap revealed itself slowly, inevitable as desert sunrise. But I'm a reasonable man. Got a proposition that benefits everyone. Iron Jack pulled a contract from his coat. The document was written in legal language that obscured its true purpose. Your daddy signs this, his debts get transferred to more manageable terms, and you come work for me. Put those forgery skills to proper use. Maggie's breathing stayed steady, but her knuckles whitened where they gripped her skirt. What kind of work? Land deeds, mining claims, documents that help hardworking folks acquire property they deserve. The euphemism was transparent as window glass. He wanted her to steal entire territories through the stroke of her talented pen. And if I refuse? Iron Jack's smile was winter sharp. Then your daddy's debts come due immediately, with interest that compounds every day he stays alive. The choice was no choice at all. Slavery disguised as employment. Lifetime servitude to prevent her father's murder. But Maggie had learned lessons in the week since being tied to Evie's fence. Had discovered that family was more than blood. That courage came in forms she'd never imagined. I'll need time to consider. Time's a luxury we don't have. Decision gets made right now. Above them, the sun touched the western mountains. Shadows grew long and forgiving across the dusty street. In the distance, dust clouds rose against the orange sky. Riders approaching fast from the direction of Carson City. The federal marshals were coming. Iron Jack's pale eyes followed her gaze toward the approaching dust. His predator instincts recognized the scent of approaching justice. Seems we got company coming. His hand moved toward the weapon at his hip. The casual gesture spoke of violence that would spare no one who stood in his way. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today's business still needs settling. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. 3 days of desperate planning reduced to heartbeats that would determine whether justice or corruption prevailed. Maggie looked at her broken father. At Evie watching from the cabin doorway. At the town that had rejected her and then learned to see beyond their own fear. The decision crystallized in her storm cloud eyes. My answer is no. The word hung in the desert air like thunder before lightning. Iron Jack's pale eyes narrowed to winter slits. His hand tightened on his weapon. The casual mask of civility cracked to reveal the predator beneath. Poor choice, girl. He gestured to his men. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounded Maggie in a circle of drawn steel and cold intention. But Evie was already moving. She stepped from the cabin doorway carrying Jacob's old mining rifle. The weapon was clean and loaded. Her hands were steady as the mountains that ringed their valley. Let her go. The words carried across Main Street with quiet authority. Behind her, other doors opened. Cornelius Blake emerged from his store. Mrs. Patterson stepped onto her porch. Sheriff Hayes appeared from the jail, his badge glinting in the dying light. The town had chosen sides. Iron Jack's laugh was dry as desert wind. Touching. But you're outnumbered and outgunned. The dust clouds on the horizon grew larger. The approaching riders would arrive within minutes, but minutes were lifetimes when violence hung in the balance. Maybe. But those riders coming from Carson City are federal marshals, and they're carrying arrest warrants. Evie's voice was steady as stone. She'd gambled everything. On Cornelius reaching the territorial capital, on the real documents convincing officials who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Iron Jack's predator instincts recognized the scent of approaching justice. His pale eyes tracked the dust clouds with calculating precision. Marshals can't arrest a man for collecting legitimate debts. They can arrest him for forgery, for fraud, for conspiracy to steal territorial lands. Maggie stepped forward. Her storm cloud eyes were clear as winter sky. Those documents you're carrying? The ones I just gave you? They're not the real evidence. The revelation hit Iron Jack between the eyes. His face went pale as desert bone. Every signature is wrong by one letter. Every date is shifted by exactly 3 days. Every territorial seal is authentic, but applied to false documents. She pulled a single paper from her dress. The real thing. Genuine evidence that would topple his entire network. When the marshals examine what you're carrying, they'll see through every lie, every forged claim, every stolen property. Iron Sundbauen, Jack's hand moved toward his weapon, but Silas Dawn was already in motion. The broken man threw himself against his captor's legs, sent Iron Jack stumbling backward into the dust. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the desert sky. The sound shattered the tense stillness. Townspeople scattered for cover. Iron Jack's men raised their weapons but found themselves facing a dozen armed citizens who'd finally chosen courage over fear. The federal marshals rode into chaos with badges glinting and weapons drawn. Marshal William Hayes dismounted with federal authority written in every line of his weathered face. His deputies fanned out to surround Iron Jack's scattered men. William Malone, you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the territorial government. The charges rolled off his tongue with legal precision. Forgery, theft, intimidation, conspiracy. A lifetime of crimes finally catching up to their perpetrator. Iron Jack's pale eyes found Maggie in the crowd. Even in defeat, his gaze carried promises of future vengeance. This isn't finished. Yes, it is. Silas Dawn struggled to his feet. His broken face was set with determination that transcended physical pain. Got testimony to give. Names and dates and places. Enough evidence to bury your whole operation. The confession poured out of him like water from broken dam. Years of criminal activity laid bare before federal authority, his own guilt acknowledged in exchange for the chance at redemption. As Iron Jack was led away in chains, the town began to breathe again. But the real reckoning happened in the quiet moments after the chaos settled. Silas Dawn stood before his daughter with hat in hand and shame in his storm cloud eyes. I'm sorry, Maggie, for everything. For using you, for abandoning you, for making you part of things you never should have seen. Maggie looked at this man who'd given her life and nearly destroyed it. The father who'd taught her dangerous skills and left her tied to a fence post. I know. The words carried weight that transcended forgiveness. Understanding that came from hard-won wisdom rather than easy absolution. Marshall says I'll likely serve 2 years in territorial prison. Maybe more if other charges stick. He looked at Evie standing beside his daughter, saw the bond that had formed in the crucible of shared danger. Got a request to make, legal papers to sign. The guardianship documents were simple as desert, truth. Silas Dawn formally surrendering parental rights to the woman who'd shown his daughter what family really meant. Maggie signed with steady hands, her talented fingers forming letters that would reshape her destiny. You sure about this? Evie's question carried years of unspoken longing, the hunger for family that had died with Jacob and been reborn in the space of desperate weeks. Been sure since the moment you cut those ropes? 6 months later, autumn, light streamed through the windows of Crosswater Seamstress, the finest dressmaking establishment in 3 territories. Evie and Maggie worked side by side at matching sewing machines. Their business thrived on reputation earned through skill and integrity. Orders came from as far as Carson City and Sacramento. Maggie's forgery skills had been transformed into legitimate artistry. She specialized in delicate embroidery that required the same precision that had once made her dangerous. A letter arrived on Tuesday morning. Prison mail with Silas Dawn's careful handwriting. Learning to read better now. Got books from the prison library. Planning to start fresh when I get out. Maybe try mining again. Honest work this time. Tell Evie I'm grateful. Not just for taking care of you, for showing both of us what decent folks look like. Your father always. Your papa by choice. Maggie folded the letter with careful hands. Set it on the windowsill where morning light could touch the words. Outside, children played in the street. Their laughter carried on desert wind that had witnessed every human folly and forgiveness. Evie looked up from her embroidery, caught Maggie staring at the fence where rope burns had long since weathered away. "Regret staying?" Maggie's smile was warm as summer rain. "Regret everything that came before staying." The words settled into the room like dust after wind, permanent and transforming. They returned to their work. Two women who'd found family in the space between abandonment and acceptance, who'd discovered that love was choice as much as circumstance. The desert stretched beyond their windows, endless and unforgiving as human nature. But sometimes unforgiving land nurtured the deepest roots. Sometimes the lost found their way home, and sometimes home was a place you built with your own hands and someone else's heart. The afternoon light slanted through their windows like blessing, illuminated the quiet industry of women who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something better. Family, business, community, future. All of it growing from seeds planted, in desperation and watered with hope. The desert wind carried their quiet conversation toward mountains that had witnessed every human struggle, every desperate gamble against impossible odds. But today it witnessed something rarer. Peace earned through courage, love chosen over fear, family forged in the crucible of shared survival. The town of Copper Ridge had learned to see beyond the surface, had discovered that character was more than color. That courage came in forms they'd never imagined, and two women worked side by side, building tomorrow from the threads of today. The desert sun set behind western mountains. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to choose love over fear. But tonight, peace settled over a small cabin where family meant what it was supposed to mean, where home was what you made it, where love was what you chose it to be. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.